first of all, welcome everyone to the cafe. First of all, I'd like to just thank everyone who came today. I'd like to also thank Tony for helping me set this up, Shibud for making the right connections, and most of all, I'd like to thank Alishba for just devoting her time to come here and talk to us about her experiences and her journey to where she is today. But first, for those who are here for the first time, I'm just going to go over, to give you a walkthrough about what TechAide is all about. So TechAide is a nonprofit that was formed in 2016 by a couple of notable individuals in the tech and startup community here in Montreal. We had people ranging all the way from Google Brain, Real Ventures, Google DeepMind, McGill University, Element AI, and we had ambassadors and people from the tech community who formed together just to create this nonprofit. And actually, TechAide is not a standalone nonprofit organization. We're affiliated with TechAide of Montreal. And for those who are outside of the town, TechAide is also known as the United Way of Canada. And so even though this event is free, we strongly encourage you to donate on our website or through the cafe that I'm going to explain later on. And all the proceeds we're going to receive are going to directly go to TechAide to help fight local issues in Canada, such as poverty, food insecurity, poor education, and many, many more that may not affect our lives personally, but that define the lives of thousands of people, lesser fortunate people within our communities. So that's TechAide. Now, the place that you're in right now is called the TechAide Cafe. It's obviously not a real cafe. It's a virtual room that allows anyone to come in and chat with others like a real cafe. So we host interactive events like such that we're going to have today with guests often in the tech community, in the business world, just to have general discussions about any topics that you choose. And so today we have with us actually the founder of TechAide Cafe, we could say. So Shibud actually works for Google DeepMind, and then on his side, he's started this cafe just so we can have open discussions about interesting topics in the tech community. So Shibud, if you can just speak about what's the TechAide Cafe from your perspective?
Yeah, so basically, as Mingxi said, TechAide Cafe is a place for the tech community in Montreal to come together and to build connections, to chat, to discuss topics that are important. We do events, for example, the Python course, some of you attended it. This was organized by TechAide Cafe. And the objective of TechAide Cafe is both for us as a community to get together and as well for us to participate in helping the Montreal in general through TechAide and through getting donations for TechAide. So if you like any of our events, you can donate on the website directly. We ask for very small donations. You can donate your time as well. So if you want to help, you can contact Tony, who's organizing a lot of things in the cafe. So you can donate your time, or if you want to give a donation, we expect small donations, as I said. Think of the donations as a thank you note for the speaker. So you can donate $5, $10, or $15. And to donate, you can either fill a form and donate, which Tony just shared the form, or you can even tweet that you want to take a coffee, and then the coffee is $5, and then you can take a drink at $15 and so on. So that's the idea. And but basically, the most important thing is for you to have fun, to enjoy the experience, and to share. So the idea is to be participative. So Alishba and Mingxi are going to chat together, but feel free to jump in. I think they will tell you when is a good time to ask questions, but we want you to have a discussion and lots of open discussions about things that we can do to improve the community and personally to improve ourselves. So with this, I'm going to leave it to Alishba and Mingxi. Two things to keep in mind. One is if you are not talking, turn off your mic so you don't create audio echoes on the cafe. And the second thing is that we are recording the session. So if you don't want to show up, simply don't turn off your video and you will not show up. Thanks a lot and have fun.
So, and also what makes the cafe special is that it is really interactive. It's not like a YouTube interview. It's not like a Twitch live stream. And so you can really be part of the discussion. Just open your mic and come chat when the time is right. So for today, we're a small number. So you can insert yourselves between questions. If you want to have something specific you want to ask Alishba or me or anybody else, you can open discussions. But yeah. So, and if you have any questions you want to ask afterwards, we also have an open discussion after the outline that we have. If you have any other external questions we didn't bring up, you can ask afterwards, and then we can discuss about topics that you really want to. And if you have a question, you can note it down during the conversation. So all that said, we're gonna welcome Alishba Imran to the TechAide Cafe. Hi, Alishba.
Hi. Oh, I think, is he frozen for me or?
Probably
Yeah,
it's frozen.
Yeah,
I mean, are you back? Okay, so until Mingxi gets back, first of all, thank you, Alishba, for joining us. So I got to know Alishba probably 2 months ago. We exchanged emails about technical issues, and I was actually really impressed with Alishba. She has a very, very, very exciting profile that she will tell us about. She has learned programming, I think, on her own, and she will tell us more. And as well, she learned how to do machine learning. And I was extremely impressed. So I thought for the cafe, it would be interesting to host Alishba and to ask her about her trajectory. How did she learn? What advice she gives for people who want to learn on their own and so on. Mingxi, I see you're back. So I will bring you back into the discussion.
Oh, this is the problem with virtual things, I guess. You disappear out of nowhere. So do we leave off somewhere, Shivan?
Yeah, so I think we can let Alishba talk a bit about her background and herself to introduce herself to the.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Thanks for that intro. So yeah, I'm Alishba. I'm currently 17 years old. So I'm based out of Ontario, Canada. And yeah, like Shival kind of mentioned, I'm just really interested in using different kind of software and hardware to solve technical problems, but then also, you know, the larger goal is to hopefully solve just like social impact problems in the world and use technology as a bridge to do that. So yeah, for the past few years, I've been particularly focusing in blockchain and machine learning. And so initially I got started in the blockchain space, got to work on one project there with IBM blockchain, essentially to create a platform that helps track medication and distribute it better in developing countries to solve the problem of counterfeit medication, which is a huge problem in a lot of these developing nations. Yeah, so I stuck around that space. I've built a
Alishba, can I interrupt you there and ask people in the audience, do they know what blockchain is? And I think you can click on yes to see. If not, Alishba can explain what is blockchain.
I can explain it.
Yeah, we have at least one no, so I think you should just.
Yeah, I can explain it. So yeah, blockchain at a high level, like you might have heard of just like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. That's probably the first thing that comes to mind when you think about blockchain. But what I was working on was actually just more focused on the technology itself rather than like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, which I'd say is just an application of blockchain. So blockchain itself is basically how I like to describe it is it's a network that takes away any sort of middleman between like all these different transactions that you would go through on a day-to-day basis. So as an example, you can think about, you know, when you let's say want to transfer over money to someone, you'd always have to go through a bank, and then the bank would take, you know, a certain amount of fee before you transfer it over to the person that you want it to go to. Whereas on a blockchain system, you can completely remove the bank. So it's just you interacting directly with a person and doing that in a way that's secure because of, you know, encryption methods that they have. So there's security, privacy there. So there's lots of applications there, you know, with removing middlemans, but then also like removing any sort of central authority. So if you think about, you know, banks, like everything within a bank is stored within a central database, but instead a blockchain network would have a bunch of different nodes or a bunch of different people involved rather than having one central kind of group that takes care of all of the information and data. So I'd say those are probably the two main components of it, removing the middleman, and then what they like to call is like this decentralization method. So instead of having everything being owned by one authority, it's decentralized. And so yeah, at a high level, I don't know if that's the best way to explain it. It's hard to understand until you really start to build stuff in the space, but that's what I would say is kind of blockchain.
So you were talking about the places that you've been, that you worked at IBM blockchain, and what are some of your other places that you've been notably in your career so far?
Yeah, for sure. I've been working, so this past summer I was, for example, working actually with some banks in Canada. So I was working with TD Bank as well as CIBC. And they were looking at ways they can use just this idea of blockchain within their company, specifically within digital identity. Like if you think about it, one of the biggest things for banks is like privacy and being able to have security with their information. Because if any of their information gets leaked out of their clients, they're just in big trouble. And so they were looking at ways they could actually use blockchain as a way to create more security and remove some of the problems with data security, specifically within like identity. So being able to digitally verify like who you are as a person, like passport, things like that are kind of applications of that. So that's one project that I was working on where I was using blockchain. Also did a little bit of work there for machine learning and different kind of financial applications for credit scoring, and stuff like that. So that's just kind of how I got my transition into machine learning, which is what I'm more focused on right now.
So I guess the big question that a lot of us want to ask is that you're only 17. How do you do at this age? When did you start? You know?
Yeah, I was always very interested in coding. So just for some background, yeah, I think I was just very interested in just like problems in general and ways we could kind of problem solve. So I was like, from a young age, I was always kind of figuring out ways we could solve problems and stuff like that. And I actually grew up in Pakistan, so that's where I was born. And so being in, seeing parts of a developing country for me was a really interesting experience because I realized there are so many big problems in the world, and reality is not a lot of people are focusing on it. And so when I moved to Canada, I realized like people, there are problems and we think people are fixing them, but reality is people are not. And so that's how my initial spark for this really, really came together. And I got interested in kind of going out there, figuring out how I could make my own impact or somehow like tackle a problem. And so, that naturally kind of came into technology and getting exposure to that. But really it was through a human accelerator program called TKS. So the Case Society, I can link their website in the chat, but essentially it's a program for high school students where they introduce you to these technologies, ways you can kind of start building projects in this space, and they give you a lot of really good mentorship and resources if this is something that you're interested in, but you don't know like where to get started.
And so the reason you really went into computer science and all these emerging technologies really because you wanted to solve these hard problems, and this is exactly the way that you found that was the most useful, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think like it's something you kind of hear within the tech sphere, and that's really what the goal of even TechAide Montreal is to bridge kind of tech and social impact. And I think that's a really important place where we need to do more. Even if you think about like Silicon Valley, which a lot of people say is kind of the hub of technology. Reality is like most people there are working at like, I don't know, Snapchat, or they're working at Facebook, just like creating a new filter for something. In my opinion, that's not really solving any big problems in the world. And so I do think there is a huge need for that. And so that's really how I got passionate about this space.
Absolutely. Wow. And what was kind of like the environment you grew up with here? So when did you come to Canada?
It was a long time ago, so I was fairly young. I don't remember the exact age off the top of my head. Yeah.
Sure. No problem. But let's say in the domain that you're in your family, what was like the environment that you grew up in and the values that you're most holding dear to? And how did it really influence you in doing what you're currently doing? How did it shape the work ethic that you have and your aspirations? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think like the biggest value is just like I think doing something greater than yourself. And I know that sounds very cliche. It's like you kind of always hear that, but that was something that I always thought a lot about. Because I think even just like being born is like a gift. It's like winning a lottery. And so when I realized that, and when you become grateful for even just that, like you realize that you have a lot of potential to do things. And so for me, it was more about, I was in the environment where I could build things, where I could learn about this. And so if
Yeah.
I didn't do it, it was like almost like I was wasting my own potential. And I think a lot of people, especially in high school, I don't know how many of us are from high school or even university, but I think that's something that we all go through, is realizing what our full potential is. And so definitely think that was like a huge turning point for me.
And at what age do you think you really got into computers, coding, and stuff like that?
It actually, I wouldn't say it was too long ago. It's probably, I'd say 2 or 3 years ago, is when I really started to build my own projects and started to teach myself programming.
And what was like so when you were starting out in your early days of learning, what were the main resources, books, ideas, or websites that really kept you in this learning, that really boosted your learning in computer programming, that helped you develop your knowledge and expertise?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of resources, and I can link some if people are interested in learning Python. But yeah, I primarily started out learning Python, and so really it was just like taking online courses. And like one of the resources I recommend is, like, for example, Udacity has some really good nano degrees that you can do. They even have like free courses that you can take part in where you can learn Python. There's a lot of other programs that I can kind of list out, but really for me, it was just taking online courses and starting to learn about those. And when I initially started doing that, that's when I started to go into machine learning and started actually building projects in that space.
So we have a question from our audience. I don't know at what age exactly you started Python too. So you're 17, so we're guessing around 15, 16, right? You
Yeah,
started
I'd
learning
say like
Python.
15, probably 15, 14,
Mm-hmm.
14 years old. Yeah.
And also another question from the audience is that so these knowledge that you acquired, how do you exactly use this in the work that you do? What's the bridge between the two? How do you directly apply your knowledge into the real world?
So do you mean more, I don't know who asked this question, but is that more for like, how do you apply like programming to real world projects, or just in general, how do you?
In your personal projects, in what you're developing, how do you transform the knowledge into application?
Mhm. Yeah, so it was actually a lot of this training, I guess you could say, was done like through the Human Accelerator program that I mentioned. Essentially, it's like a 3-year program. The first year exposes you to a bunch of different technologies, and then you start kind of going deep into them and building projects. The second year is a program that I just finished. And within that program, you actually dive really deep into big industries in the world, and then you break it down using this framework called first principles. So really the idea is, how do you break a problem down until you reach its root cause? And that's how I've been doing a lot of just problem identification. So for the past couple of months, I've just been spending time going really deep into different industries, trying to identify what are some really big problems that currently exist, what are like the root causes of those problems, and then is there a way I can actually tackle those problems? And so I really think like it's not something that you'd intuitively think of as like researching problems, try to figure out how to solve them, but I think it's totally possible, especially because there's like so much information out there, and you can find a lot of really good resources to start building like real world applications.
So what you mean by breaking down these big hard problems into their roots, you mean simplifying them to the most basic computer mathematic principles and how to solve that? Or
Well, yeah, so what I mean by that is more like, I think if you think about a lot of companies today, I think a lot of them are tackling like a symptom of a problem. It's not necessarily like the root cause that's causing the problem. And so the framework really is like, okay, let's take like climate change, for example. A lot of people would look at climate change and be like, okay, climate change, we just gotta like somehow reduce temperatures in our world. Okay, what are ways I can tackle that? And they'd start looking at solutions. But that's not the problem. Climate change is actually like the effect of a deeper problem. And so if you kind of go deeper into that and identify what that is, and you might be able to understand, okay, maybe it's like emissions that are being caused from like agriculture, like crop yields, like you can go on and on, but there's a lot of different, I think, almost sub problems that you can identify.
yeah. So we can dig deeper into your projects that you've been working on or that you have worked on. But right now, so regarding your early days when you started to learn how to code, so what was What was some of the main challenges you encountered while you were learning about these technologies and programming?
I think the initial learning curve is just really huge. Like if you don't know programming, I think it can be very overwhelming at first. So I think the thing that was helpful for me was really like reaching out to people like Shibble and other people, you know, in the industry that have a lot of experience either with programming or just, you know, applying it to a real world problem. And so that for me was really helpful because the way I kind of set up my learning sprints was I would spend, you know, a week learning a new topic, go kind of deep into it, learn about more of the technical content. And then I would set up a call with someone. And you can literally just cold email people. That's like, I think a lot of people are open to responding if you can cold email them and you seem genuine and you want to ask for advice. Most of the time, if they're like nice, they'll be open to helping you. So yeah, I just set up calls with them and I talked to them about what I just learned and then get their feedback on if I learned it the right way, if I was missing something. That's one way I recommend just like, you know, getting support on your learning. The other thing I'd recommend is you can do a lot of like, if you're learning coding, for example, you can do a lot of like sprints with a person. So do like shared programming. So literally just hop on a call with them, open up a browser and just start coding and then ask them for feedback on your code and stuff like that. So I think a lot of that reaching out was really helpful for me. And then the third thing I'd say is like actually building projects. So like don't just learn about it because you're most likely going to forget it. I think the best way to learn is to actually start building. So I know it can seem intimidating, but just start by building a simple like web app or simple application, and then you'll kind of see that where your knowledge lacks from there.
I love how you really have this thing that if you need something, just ask for help. I don't think it's a notion that is rooted deep enough in a lot of people, is that people don't want to ask for help. People don't want to be too assertive, but I guess it works out very well. If you need something, just ask for somebody's expertise, right? Okay, so we don't have any audience question right now. Shiva, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about finding root causes. Can you give us other examples so that we understand more what you mean and how to use it to solve various problems?
Yeah, it's actually, the concept is called first principles. If you're interested in kind of this like mental framework, I believe it's a concept that Elon Musk uses actually, and he's Elon Musk, so he uses this a lot. But I can send like a really quick article that I like about that kind of introduces this topic in the chat. But really what it is there's different ways you can use it. Like a lot of big consulting, if you look at even like McKinsey, for example, they use this idea of like the 5 whys. So they'll start out with a general problem and then they'll break it down by like why, like, okay, you've identified a problem. Okay, why does that exist? And then you have another problem. Okay, why does that exist? So basically just keep asking why until you have identified like the root problem. And that's the concept of first principles, is to really just break down a problem. And for me, that was like one of the best frameworks that I ever learned, because I think that's helped me identify interesting projects that I can work on and interesting areas where I can actually contribute my skills.
That's super exciting. And Alishba, I know that you worked on something related to robotics. Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. So like I mentioned, I've moved kind of more into machine learning. And the specific problem that I'm looking at is actually within prosthetics. So what I realize is that prosthetics today are very expensive. So they can cost upwards of like $100,000. And so I did like the first principles framework that I mentioned to break that down. And what I realized is that a lot of the cost is associated with the actual material used in the arm. And then the other problem is that the actual arm is not automated. So the user has to manually control like which objects they want to pick up and use. And essentially what I did was I 3D printed the entire arm. So it costs like significantly less, from like $100,000 to like $50, not including like the other hardware components. And now I'm looking at different kind of deep learning techniques, like computer vision. So being able to use different algorithms to identify different objects from an arm and actually figure out how to lift them or move them around. So yeah, at a high level, that's kind of the project that I've been working on, and I'm looking at ways I can contribute some of this research to other areas like neurosymbolic AI, and approaches in this idea of like reinforcement learning. I know I just threw around a bunch of words, but if you're interested, I can talk more about them.
Well, actually, let's like I came a bit late into this. I apologize, but many of the people I recognize on the call are people that we have different skill levels. We have people that started from the beginning, like they're starting their journey right now into programming, etc. So one, it's fantastic, I've read your background and all that, so it's great to have examples of young people that have done, very well in this. But again, if you are to go back and say, we talked about first principles, but if we start talking about people who are in the programming, you talk about let's do examples, learn different topics. People that are starting today in Python, how would you tell them to move forward? Let's say if you have, my son comes up to me and says, I woke up today and I'm interested. Where do they start and how do they continue? If you answer this already, I'll go back and check out the recording after. And I see Shibal smiling, so I believe it's been answered. But yeah, that's yeah.
I can answer it again. And I briefly touched on it, but I didn't go into too much detail, so I can for sure mention it.
Go ahead.
So yeah, I mentioned kind of three things that I would do. The first thing I'd say is do courses. So start with an online course. I can send you an example of a really good course. I recommend doing like Udacity courses. They're very, in my opinion, they're very extensive and helpful. So if you'd like, I can send you some examples of them afterwards. So that's one thing I'd start with. Like first thing first, just start by learning the basics. So how do you actually, write a function? How do you start writing, basic structure of the programming language? Once you understand that, I would actually just move on to building projects. So what I'd recommend there is looking at projects that people have already done. So you can look at GitHub. Like GitHub has a lot of open source Python projects that people have done. I recommend looking through those and trying to understand what they've built, how they've built it, and then that's where I would start. So I would try to replicate one of those projects. So without looking at the code, try to replicate the exact same thing that they've built there, and then see kind of how good you do or where you miss. Based on that, hopefully you identify, areas where you need to improve. I would spend more time doing some more courses, and then I would just try to build your own projects. So once you've kind of strengthened your skill by replicating other people's projects, start looking at ways you can build your own project using Python. And so that's what I'd recommend. And then I also talked a little bit about reaching out to people, getting mentors to help you. So if you learn a technical skill, like reach out to people, get on a call with them and get their feedback on if you're thinking about this the right way, if there's something you're missing. That was something that was very, very helpful for me, because as much as you can find help online, like it's much better to talk to a person in real life. I don't know if that was helpful, but
that's incredibly helpful, because it's also good to re-emphasize it, because you have to start, like people tend to try to go to step number 2 or step number 3, and they the first thing, you have to do things the right way. And I think when we started by teaching some of the people Python, you have to start by the basics, build up your your knowledge, that's the expertise, before moving on to projects. Then the projects help you learn what you're missing, but you have to have the a strong base, a reasonable base to start off with, and then you can go back and forward between them and help using the mentors to pull you up to the next level or answer areas which are obscure or not visible to you.
Yeah.
I know programming obviously not easy to learn, so it takes years to learn, just one language. Now, when you were starting out, when you were learning all of this, now surely sometimes you were tired of it, you were discouraged. So really, what kept you going and all this time to just continue to finish learning it? So what was that really kept you motivated?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think for me, it was always like just getting to a point where I could build my own projects. Like that was a huge motivator. Was like I had ideas for projects I wanted to do, but I think you need some sort of technical level of skills to start building them. So that for me was the motivator. But the other thing I'd recommend, to your first point about feeling like overwhelmed or feeling like it'll take a long time, like I recommend just to start, because I remember when I was starting, I was overthinking it. Like, should I start with this course? Should I start in this area first? Like, what if I'm not thinking about this the right way? But there is no right way to think about it. Like, I would recommend just don't overthink it if this is something you've been wanting to do for a long time. Like, my action item for you is like, after this call, like, start taking a course, start learning. Like I really, really recommend, because if you start somewhere, I think you'll start to kind of grow and learn either way.
Yeah, they say, you know, the hardest step in the 1,000-step journey is the first one. It's like,
Yeah.
I guess you're right. I totally agree. And you talked about getting feedback from mentors, from people who are experts in the field. Uh, Now, in general, in what you in your career, what do you think was the best advice that you've received?
Mm-hmm. Like, I think the best advice was one of my mentors, like it's actually a quote, which is like, you have like 99% of the same information that like the smartest people in the world, like Elon Musk, Bill Gates, have. That for me was very shocking, just realizing that I literally have access to, like, if you have internet connection, you have a device, like you have access to pretty much all the same information that like the smartest people in the world do. And when you realize that, like, you realize that there's so much you can do, there's so much potential that you're probably just wasting. For me, that was a huge thing and motivator, where I was like, there's nothing else I really need to do except for start looking online, start searching the right things and figuring things out myself. For me, that was like probably the biggest thing that, got me like self-motivated to actually start. Which is another thing. I think a lot of people need someone to tell them to do something, but I think you should start figuring out your own motivations, that you're learning yourself rather than other people telling you what to do.
Mm-hmm. So I know you really seem like an inspiration for a lot of young people, because you're doing stuff that 30-year-old, 40-year-olds are maybe starting to get into, but you're half the age, and you're very inspiring. So who inspires you?
A lot of people inspire me. I'd say, I mean, like a few people that I guess I can name that I just look up to in, like, I guess like the tech community would be, like there's someone called Naval Ravikant. He's just like I can drop this name in the chat as well. But yeah, he's basically an investor, and he's the CEO of AngelList, which is just like basically like an investment arm for a bunch of different startups. And he has like really interesting kind of just tweets and motivational things that he posts. And so I really like kind of the way he thinks about problems and just his general framework for like solving problems and looking at technologies. So that's one person. If you don't already follow him, I think looking up his thoughts and the way he kind of thinks about these problems is very good. Another person is like Vinod Khosla. He's the founder of Khosla Ventures. So similarly, he has a venture arm. He invests in a bunch of different startups. But he has very just like interesting thoughts on, machine learning and ways we can apply technology to create, startups and solve some of these problems that I was talking about. So yeah, these are probably three people I'd mention, and then probably also Elon Musk, which I'm sure hopefully most of us are aware of. But yeah.
I have a question. How do you deal with friends of you in your age, where you feel that most of the time they're, let's say, living their life, playing video games and enjoying the outings, like different approach that the approach you have taken in your life?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think like the way, there's no real way to deal with that. Like, I think it's just like everyone kind of views things in a different way, but I really think like it comes down to realizing your potential. Like a lot of my friends that I have, at least, like I know they have a lot of potential to do really interesting things, and they're also very passionate. Like they're hardworking, they're willing to work hard and do things. But I think it's really just like getting started, and getting that initial exposure for them, because they haven't gotten that exposure, they don't know what they can really do. I don't think they fully tapped into their potential. So personally, like I'm always trying to help out my friends. Obviously, like I'm always telling them kind of what they can do if they're interested in something. But I think really it comes down to exposure and getting started. Because I really do think anyone can do this. Like, I don't think I'm special. I don't think any high schooler can really get started and do this as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Does anybody else have any questions as of now? Anything they
What's next for you?
Next, so I'm in the last year of high school, so probably just finishing up high school is the goal. And then I'm looking into hopefully going into university next year. But really, I think for me, like the long-term goal, at least, I don't really plan out like my entire life, but I think the long-term goal is to either work with a really cool company that's working on really interesting projects. I think, DeepMind is one example of that. OpenAI is doing a lot of really interesting work. I think getting to, contribute to work there would be really interesting, working on a problem that's hard, that could help really impact people. So that could be either in the form of, working with a company or even maybe starting my own venture or my own company that kind of uses technology to solve this big problem. But yeah, I think right now I'm just kind of learning and building projects, and then hopefully one of those translates into making an impact in the world and solving these problems that I'm passionate about.
All right. Any other questions? And we're at some discussion.
One last question. Do you do hackathons?
I do. I don't do a lot. Like, I know people who do a lot of hackathons. I'm not one of those people that goes to hackathons like every weekend, but I've done a few. So I actually really like hackathons. If that's not something I mentioned, I recommend doing hackathons because it really gets you into that like build mentality. You get to meet people that are interested in similar things as you, and then because you have like 2 days to build a product or build something, it really forces you to start learning. So for me, I think hackathons were really helpful, and I'd recommend them.
All right.
Go ahead, ask. Yeah.
We have a question from one of our audience. Is that does it help to have a lot of background in mathematics, statistics, probabilities in what you do in these programming things that you do, or what are some of the backgrounds you really recommend? Some of the fields that you recommend also really paying a lot of attention to.
Mm-hmm. So for machine learning, I think if you want to be technical, mostly you just kind of really need to know calculus and vectors. And then I'd say like linear algebra. Maybe Shibal could speak more to this because I know he works with a lot of really smart people. So maybe he can talk about some of their backgrounds. But that's what I would say. But I also don't think like you need to go to university and have a full degree to get started. I do think you can learn this on your own, which is what I've been doing. Like I've been learning calculus right now, for example, and so you can do this, without having a really strong degree at least, or going to university.
Yeah, I mean, so I agree with Alishba is that algebra, calculus are important, linear algebra and calculus. But in machine learning, you can think of two areas of machine learning. Either you want to do new research, so you want to discover new algorithms in machine learning, or you want to apply machine learning. So for example, you want to use machine learning to diagnose cancer or stuff like that. And if you want to do applied machine learning, you can do a lot without having any mathematical background, because you can obviously you need to have good logic, you need to be able to do complicated things, but you don't need the mathematical tools because the algorithms are already developed, and in many cases they're already available in libraries. So you shouldn't stop and say I can't do it if I don't have a background in math, if what you want to do is to apply machine learning. Obviously, if you have this background, it's useful because it helps you to think, it helps you to understand what's happening, but it's not necessary.
There's another question in chat. Talking about school, isn't it sometimes overwhelming to spend so much time on machine learning and your side projects? How did you include it to your daily routine? Like how much time per week, let's say, do you spend on solving problems and machine learning? So basically about your time management along with school.
Yeah. Actually, so I think, me before school, I think or before, doing all of this, I think that I probably used to waste a lot more time than I thought I did. And I think if you're in high school or even in university, you realize that you probably spend a lot of hours just doing nothing or wasting a lot of your time. So for me, that was a huge thing where I realized like I can actually do both. Like I don't need to give up on one or the other. And so for the past like 2 years, I've actually been doing high school full time as well as doing my other projects. And so, you know, and it didn't really affect my marks too much, but I'd say like it is possible. It's really just about time management. And so a few things I'd recommend is like one thing I did, for example, if you're very interested in managing both, is like map out your day. So I literally took like Google Calendar and I mapped out my entire day from like when I wake up exactly to like when I sleep. And I created like time blocks for everything that I do within the day. And then I basically figured out like how much time I waste and how much time I actually have to spare. And I realized like within a day, I probably have like 3 or 4 extra hours that I could spend just learning, you know, machine learning or working on my projects. And so for me, that was a huge thing. I know that's probably not the answer you want to hear, but I really do think you have a lot more time than you probably think you do. In terms of how much time I spend, it's hard to count because it's not like I count like how much time I spend on each activity, but I probably spend like a good, I'd say 20 or 25 hours a week at least on these projects. So yeah, it's definitely not like a little time. It's a lot of time that I spend, but yeah, I do think you can balance both.
And do you ever experience any burnout of any kind over work?
I like, for me personally, like I think it's more about like, yeah, it just comes down to managing your time. Like I don't think you should ever take on more than you can do. It's like for sure don't take on, you know, everything because you think it's good. I think it's always better to work on things you enjoy. So like first thing is like make sure you enjoy what you're doing. If you're doing like 3 things and you hate all of them, then you're probably going to feel burnout. So that's what I recommend. First thing is, you know, enjoy what you do. So don't take on something you don't actually enjoy. So like if you don't enjoy machine learning, don't do it. There's so many other things you can do, right? So never feel pressure to do something because like other people are doing it. There's so many other ways you can kind of reach your goal if you're passionate about something. Yeah, that would be the first thing. And the second thing, like I said previously, would be like manage your time. So like make sure you map out and are intentional about how you spend your time. Like I'd say don't take on more than 2 or 3 priorities at once. So yeah, like I think those 2 things are very important.
From a general life perspective and from a programming perspective, so what are some of the mistakes that you got into or things you wish you had known when you were starting out? Anything in those?
I think the biggest thing is just like overthinking what I should be working on. Like I'd spend a lot of time figuring out, you know, if I want to learn coding, like which language should I learn? Where should I start? And I think a lot of people face this problem, especially when they're starting out. So advice like I would give to my past self is just get started. Like don't spend, you know, if you have an idea of what you want to do, just start and you'll figure it out. Rather than, you know, trying to map everything out and figure it out in the beginning. That would probably like that I think for me is the biggest thing is just have a bias towards taking action rather than like thinking about things for too long.
And I know there's some experienced coders like Shibid. Shibid, do you want to talk about any problems you've encountered when you were starting out?
I agree 100% with Alishba is that the most important thing is just to get things done. So for coding, the best way to learn how to code is to code.
Yeah.
So take on a project, as Alishba said, and go for it. Something that I learned that's very, very valuable is actually 2 techniques. One of them is pair programming. So if you can convince somebody to code with you, this is very, very, very useful. Because even if they are at the same level as you, if they are better than you, that's much better. But even if they are at the same level as you, or even if you are better than them, pair programming is very valuable because first it allows you to focus more, it's more fun, and together you can catch mistake faster. Another technique that is more advanced, I would say, is code reviews. So if you write code, you send it to somebody who will review the code, and then they will come back and they will tell you, okay, fix this and fix that and so on. So if you're lucky enough to be part of a team where You have other coders who are ready to do this. And again, they don't need to be better than you, but they could be at the same level. But by doing code review first, it forces you to make the code very clean so they can read it. And secondly, you take advantage of their knowledge. So even if you are at the same level, you probably know 20% of coding. They know 20%, but together you might know 30%. So together you'll be much better than alone.
So this is the programming version of getting a buddy at the gym to spot you.
Yeah, that's actually so helpful. One website I recommend is LeetCode. There's a lot of websites like this, but I recommend LeetCode. So it's like an online place where you can learn programming, and then it has like challenges for you. So like I'd recommend taking like, maybe it takes you a couple of minutes, but try like one challenge each day and try to basically solve the problem that they give you.
Shibil once mentioned to me the rubber ducky technique. Do you want to talk about that, or is that too advanced for us?
Yeah, this is extremely advanced technique. So as a coder, I'm sure anybody who has done coding for a year or more has noticed this. Is many times you have a problem, and then you go to somebody and you tell them, I have this problem, and you start explaining the problem to them. And by the time you finish the explanation, you know the solution. Because explaining something very clearly already clarifies it in your head. And in many cases, you just discover the problem by the time you finish the explanation. Okay, so what is the technique? The technique is, what if there is nobody next to you, or you don't want to bother anybody? So the idea is that you have a rubber duck, and you talk to the rubber duck, and you tell the rubber duck, do you know I have a problem? And my loop is not working whenever it's exiting too fast, and so on. And then you imagine that you are going to explain it to this rubber duck, and by the time you finish, you would have solved your problem. So that's the rubber duck technique. So actually, I use it myself. I have a Slack channel, which is called Shibble Duck. And I talk to my duck, and I explain the problem. And this allows me to clarify my thoughts and then fix the solution.
Do you text them or call them?
Sorry, go ahead, Nixie.
Do you text your duck or do you call the duck?
No, actually, I text them. I'm too shy to talk to them by voice, but text I'm more comfortable. I just describe the problem in text.
I guess it trains your brain more. You have to convert knowledge into words too while you're at it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, by the end you finish, you feel that you have a very good description of the problem, and that is very helpful.
Well, do we have any questions anybody in the audience have as of now into these little techniques, tips? No, we're looking good. So the period is coming to an end at 6 o'clock. Obviously, the discussion can go on if anybody wants to stay and discuss. So Alishba, just clear for everybody right now, where can we find you? Any things you want to plug in, any socials?
Yep, I can leave. Do you want me to just leave them in the chat?
As you wish. Where can we discover about the work that you do? Actually, while you're doing that, there is a question. Usually Python, it's a nice length. Is Python suitable for machine learning? And do you usually do a problem by yourself or with a team? Which one do you prefer and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think for my experience, Python is probably the most commonly used, at least in machine learning. Yeah, like if you want to develop like a lot of at least the application part, like Shibble mentioned, there's like 2 buckets. If you want to go into applied machine learning, a lot of it is Python. There's already pre-existing libraries that exist for a lot of these algorithms. You can check out like TensorFlow, stuff like that. So there are libraries that you can use. A lot of them, I believe, are just in Python. So that's why I would recommend Python, but depending on what you want to do, like another language could also make sense. For example, I know some applications are better for like C++. Some might be better for like Java. Java is generally more of like a beginner programming language. So if you want to start with something more general, I would actually start with Java, and then I would probably go into Python. But that's just like personally how I did it. So I'm not sure if anyone else has insights on that.
So technically discussion period that we have today is going to end very soon, but you're always welcome to stay. And I just have a question that since your position as such at such a young age, especially in being a woman in such STEM community that is so heavily concentrated with men, do you ever feel, with your age or gender, your credentials, do you ever feel nervous or intimidated or anything about going into this field at such an advanced degree?
I mean, I think we definitely need more females in this space for sure. Personally, I think like for me, I think like the things you have to learn or the skills you have to learn might be different because you're like, a young female in this space. But I really do think like regardless of who you are and your background, you can do some really interesting things in this space. Yeah, I mean, I still agree that we need more females. Like, there's been a lot of times where I've been to conferences or even hackathons where it's been like probably like 70% male dominant. And so it's still something that exists as much as, we try to promote more females in STEM and whatnot. So yeah, like I do think more females should get interested in this. And I think it really comes down to getting exposure. So like I was talking about it earlier, like a lot of people don't have exposure. And so like you wouldn't know that you like something until you have exposure. And I really think, that's a problem of education and integrating it more into our education system, but also just like talking to people more about it, having, events like these where you can open it up to everyone to kind of come in and learn more about these topics.
Anybody like to add anything to that? Very good. Do you have to run at a certain time, Alishba?
I can stay till a little bit over 6 if there's like questions that people want to ask.
Okay. Well, I guess if anybody have any questions, this is kind of your time, and time is limited.
And before jumping into questions, and I just want to thank people who participated in this. So obviously, Alishba, thank you. You have been very generous with your time and very inspiring. Thank you, Mingxi, for organizing this and helping in the course. So Mingxi was one of the people who was leading in the course organization, and he did an amazing job. I think we got much more people than we expected for the course. So we have Mingxi to thank for this. And I want to thank as well Tony, who just joined us, joined the TechAide Cafe team. Tony, I don't know if we can see you, but thanks a lot for as well helping organize this. And Tony will be, going forward, will be organizing many events in TechAide Cafe. So if you want to participate, if you want to volunteer for things, you can contact cafe@techaidemontreal.org, and we will respond to you, and probably Tony will contact you to help organize things.
And if you have suggestions for events you would like to have, if you would like, other types of sessions, if you, like anything you have an idea that you would like to see, bounce it by Tony and Mingxi, and they will see what's possible and what's not possible and take it from there, because there's a lot that could be done, and it's just a question of figuring out what's possible and what's not possible to be done with the time that they have.
Yeah, and we are looking for fresh ideas, for ways to make things better. So if you have any comments on things we could have done better, we would love to hear from you.
All right, it's 6 o'clock. So if anybody have any questions, you're free to leave it in the chat or unmute your mic. If not, we're going to be ending the session very soon. So yeah, it's your time.
Yeah, and if you have any like other specific questions, like if you want to learn about courses to do or anything more specific to your own case, then you can also email me, and I'd be happy to help.
All right. Yeah, so if ever you guys want to contact Alishba after this, you can find her by her email, LinkedIn, it's all in the chat. And sinon, thank you everyone who came today, and it was a superb chat that we have. And yeah, we're going to be closing the call in about 2 to 3 minutes if nobody have anything to add.
No, thanks for being here. I recognize some of the names. It's always good to see the same people over and over again. You know, it's great. Thanks for being here. And you know, obviously, Alishba, you're an inspiration. You know, at our age, we look at these and you know, and we say, you would be the daughter we'd love to have at one point or another. So it is something to you know, you're inspiring. It's great. Like it's great to have you. It's always positive and inspiring when we see young people. Lead, find their way, find their voice when they're young. You know, that's a very, very good thing. And finding your voice happens at all times and at all ages. You know, you don't have to be 16, but when you're 16, it's something big. You know, the fact that you're able to navigate through the all the noise that's out there and find you know like what you like and do it and have all these companies and people appreciate what you're doing. So and obviously it's not just for them, you're doing it for you, so you're finding your calling. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I have one last question I want to ask you, I guess. So what are some of the complementary skills you find important in general? Public speaking, anything like that?
Yeah, public speaking is very important. It was something that I like. I think it's something you don't really get trained on, but it's definitely really important. Especially because I think one of the big things in this industry is like being able to convince people of your ideas. And so I think half of it is like just being able to articulate what your project is, what you're working on, who you are, like what are your ideas. So I think definitely public speaking. Then, you know, there's a lot of other skills that I recommend developing, such as like how do you work with a team? How do you collaborate with people? Because you're not going to be working on this, you know, by yourself. Usually you're going to be working with people in the future, hopefully, or even right now. So I think being able to develop really strong team working skills is very important. Yeah, like those are probably a few things that come on top of my head, but I'd say really public speaking is huge, being able to coordinate with the team and convince people of the ideas that you have and stuff like that. Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. And we had an absolutely great conversation today. If nobody else has any questions, will be the end.
Thank you.
All right. We're gonna be closing the call. Thank you, Alishba. Thank you, Nabi. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, everyone who came. And yeah, we'll see you next time.